U.S. strike on Venezuela has landed with force, and with a message that is generating immediate reactions internationally. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, issued a blistering public statement within hours of the attack. His message was not just condemnation. It was a statement about the future of international relations and the role of nuclear weapons in national survival. Medvedev closed with a phrase that generated immediate reactions on social media and in international outlets. Long live nuclear weapons. Analysts and commentators read this as an indirect warning to the United States and its allies. Moscow did not frame it as an explicit threat, but the message was unmistakable. Power, not diplomacy, defines survival in today's world. The shockwaves from Washington's strike on Venezuela are already rippling far beyond Latin America. Moscow was among the first capitals to respond, and its words were sharp, deliberate, and calculated for maximum impact. Medvedev accused Washington of carrying out what he called an act of aggression against an independent country that posed no direct threat to the United States. He described the operation as a violent seizure of a legally elected leader, carried out, he said, under the banner of so-called international law. The tone was harsh and appeared designed to maximize political impact, according to observers. By calling the capture of Maduro a violent seizure, Medvedev framed the U.S. action not as law enforcement, but as state-sponsored kidnapping. He rejected any legal justification Washington might offer, arguing that international law was being used as a pretext for what was, in his view, imperialism. The choice of language was deliberate. Medvedev did not use diplomatic hedging or careful qualifications. He spoke in absolutes: aggression, seizure, violation, language designed to delegitimize the American operation entirely. Medvedev did not stop at condemning the United States. He argued that Europe was selective or tepid in its response to the Venezuela operation. Several European governments, however, did call for respect for international law in their statements. The criticism was pointed. Europe, Medvedev suggested, claims to uphold international law and sovereignty, but applies those principles selectively depending on who is doing the violating. Medvedev then turned his focus elsewhere, mocking Ukraine's leadership and accusing Washington of misdirected priorities. His remarks were aimed at both Kiev and its Western backers. The implicit message: if the West can intervene in Venezuela, why does it lecture Russia about Ukraine? If Washington can capture a foreign leader and bomb a capital city, what moral authority does it have to criticize Moscow? This line of argument is familiar from Russian diplomacy. Moscow has long accused the West of hypocrisy, of invoking international law when convenient and ignoring it when not. Venezuela, in Medvedev's framing, is the latest and most dramatic example. But it was Medvedev's final conclusion that drew the most attention globally. He argued that the events in Caracas prove one thing above all else: that any country wishing to protect itself must strengthen its military to the maximum. According to Medvedev, the only guarantee against foreign intervention is a nuclear arsenal. This is a stark message. Medvedev is essentially telling the world that diplomacy, treaties, and international institutions cannot protect a nation. Only raw military power, specifically nuclear weapons, can deter intervention. The logic is brutal in its simplicity. Venezuela had oil, Venezuela had sovereignty, Venezuela had international recognition. None of it mattered. What Venezuela did not have was a nuclear arsenal. And now its president is an American.
I want to invite you to a free trading and investing workshop right here in Los Angeles that will forever change
Custody. Medvedev ended his statement with a phrase that generated immediate international commentary. "Long live nuclear weapons," he wrote. Analysts and commentators read this as an indirect warning. Moscow did not formulate it as an explicit threat, but the implication was clear. The phrase is provocative by design. It celebrates the very weapons that the international community has spent decades trying to limit and control. It reframes nuclear arsenals not as existential threats to humanity, but as the ultimate guarantee of national survival. If Medvedev's logic gains traction, the implications could be significant. That argument could be used by other governments as an example of why they prioritize military deterrence. This runs counter to the non-proliferation goals the international community has pursued for decades, and it comes from one of the most senior security officials in Russia. Understanding who Medvedev is helps explain why his statement matters. Dmitry Medvedev served as president of Russia from 2008 to 2012, during which time Vladimir Putin served as prime minister. He is now deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, one of the most powerful positions in the Russian government. Medvedev is considered a close ally of Putin. In recent years, his public statements have become increasingly hawkish, particularly regarding the West and the conflict in Ukraine. His statements are widely understood to reflect, if not official Kremlin policy, at least a strain of thinking within Russia's security establishment. When Medvedev speaks about nuclear weapons, the world pays attention. The long-live nuclear weapons statement is consistent with a pattern. Medvedev has repeatedly invoked nuclear threats in the context of Western actions that Russia opposes. His rhetoric has escalated significantly since the start of the Ukraine conflict. The Russian Foreign Ministry issued its own condemnation, using equally forceful language. In a rare early morning statement, Moscow accused the United States of committing an act of armed aggression against Venezuela. The ministry condemned the strike and warned that escalation could spiral beyond control. The pretexts cited to justify these actions are untenable, the ministry stated. Ideologically driven hostility has prevailed over practical pragmatism and a willingness to build relations based on trust and predictability. Russia urged all sides to step back. Dialogue, it said, must replace military pressure. The foreign ministry statement was more measured than Medvedev's, but no less firm. It rejected American justifications entirely and framed the operation as a violation of fundamental international norms. Moscow framed the crisis as a test, not just for Venezuela, but for the entire international order. Latin America must remain a zone of peace, the foreign ministry declared. Venezuela has the right to determine its own future free from external military interference. Russia reaffirmed its solidarity with the Venezuelan people and voiced support for the country's Bolivarian leadership. The statement invoked principles that Russia has emphasized since the end of the Cold War: sovereignty, non-interference, and the right of nations to choose their own path.